My brother has been flirting with my wife for years, but my parents kept encouraging it. At dinner, my wife exposed my mom's affair. Now my brother's stalking us. This weekend my parents have asked me and my wife to a special meal with other family members to commemorate their 25th wedding anniversary. It's meant to be a wonderful family get-together, but I'm having conflicting feelings about coming. The major reason I am reluctant is because of Ethan. You see, Ethan is my younger brother, and although being just 3 years apart, we have never been close. We do not have a solid relationship. A lot of it has to do with his feelings for me. He has a lot of animosity, and it has been like way since we were children. Growing up, our parents were quite strict, especially our father. Dad spent years in the military, and that perspective clearly influenced how Dad raised us. He continually pushed us to compete against one another. It didn't matter if they were racing each other to the school bus in the morning or attempting to outdo each other while performing chores at home. Everything seemed like a competition between the two of us. It wasn't simply about giving your all, it was about outperforming your sister. In the beginning, I thought the rivalry between Ethan and myself wasn't too awful. It may have even been healthful initially. We were youngsters, and a little rivalry is acceptable. But as time passed, things began to alter. My brother began to slip behind, notably in school. I was always good in my schoolwork. I'd receive B's and A's, perform well on examinations, and bring home report cards that my parents would be pleased of. Unfortunately, that simply made matters worse for Ethan. Because I was doing so well, my father was always comparing himself to me. When Ethan didn't measure up, he would face terrible consequences. He wasn't permitted to eat supper some evenings, and he was forced to stand in a corner for hours until his legs gave out. I could tell how much it wounded him, not only physically, but also emotionally. Dad repeatedly used me as an example. "Look at your brother," he said. "Why can't you be more like him?" He even had me teach Ethan, believing that if I helped him study, his grades would improve. I didn't mind assisting. I wanted to, but my abilities were limited. The fact was that Ethan did not love studying. It was not his thing. He was more of a fun, energetic child who enjoyed being outside, running about, and utilizing his imagination. Sitting motionless with a book bored him. No matter how hard anyone worked to make it happen. As the years passed, it became clear that the continual comparisons and pressure had taken a toll on Ethan. He began to resent me, and I understand why. He felt as if he was constantly one step behind and falling short, no matter how hard he worked. And I will acknowledge something that is difficult to express out. I was so concentrated on making our father proud that I didn't notice how it was affecting my younger brother. I never truly considered how that must have felt for him. Constantly living in my shadow and being punished for not looking like me. Then, just as I was preparing to leave for college, something happened that shocked the entire family. Ethan did something horrible. He consumed an entire bottle of sleeping tablets. That was scary. Fortunately, our parents spotted him in time and brought him to the hospital. The medics were able to preserve him, for which I will be eternally thankful. But that moment altered everything. It was as if someone had removed my parents' blindfolds, particularly my father. For the first time they recognized how much agony Ethan had been concealing, how profoundly he had been aching all these years. It took something as terrible, something that could have resulted in catastrophe, for them to recognize the harm that had been building up inside him for so long. After the overdose, things at home altered dramatically. My parents began attending to therapy sessions with Ethan to better understand what he was going through. Since then, they've treated him as if he were made of glass, and every incorrect phrase or bit of pressure would lead him to crack. Over the years, I've also apologized to my brother several times. I have apologized to him for not being more alert and for not sticking up for him when we were younger. I attempted to make things right between the two of us. But even now, after all these years, it feels like my parents are still babying him. They are continually walking on eggshells around him. After high school, when my father wanted Ethan to go to college, my brother threatened to commit himself again, claiming he couldn't live away from home and didn't need any more education. So he never went without a valid degree. Ethan has struggled to find a consistent, high-paying work. Even when he gets a job, he struggles to keep it. He either skips too many days or has a disagreement with co-workers, which leads to his termination. It's like a recurring pattern. He still stays at home, does not pay rent, and relies on our parents for everything. Groceries, bills and daily expenses, you name it. Just to be clear, my brother does not currently have any confirmed mental illnesses. He attends therapy on occasion, and aside from the despair he had at the time, he is doing well now. He is functioning. He isn't struggling like he used to. In reality, he has a close circle of buddies with whom he spends every day. They smoke together, drink, and attend parties. It's not like he's sitting at home withdrawn and secluded. He is living his life. The only catch is that he's doing it on my parents' cash. That, I believe, is the most frustrating aspect for me. My parents never pushed, challenged, or asked him to step up. They are afraid. And I understand that. They are frightened of pushing him too far and losing him again. And he understands that. He understands just how to tap into that dread. At times it appears like he is taking advantage of the situation. Because of all this, I've always felt terrible for my parents. So when they asked me to send money back home to help them with their everyday expenditures, I couldn't say no. I know they're retired now and don't have the same income they did before. And with Ethan not contributing anything, I feel like it's the least I can do to help them in this difficult circumstance. Since then, I've been sending money every month to help out while my brother lives as if he doesn't care. And it's come to the point where I feel compelled to take up the slack in the family. My wife now knows my whole family history. She has a great disdain for my brother. And it's not only because he's a bad son to my parents, he's also made her feel really uncomfortable on several occasions. You see, Ethan is always flirting with my wife. He has always been extremely attentive to her, tries to be touchy-feely around her, and even makes inappropriately suggestive comments. He does it under the pretense of being fun or nice, and if I call him out on it, he dismisses it, laughs, and claims I'm exaggerating. What makes matters worse is how my parents deal with these situations. They do not recognize it for what it truly is. Instead of confronting Ethan or supporting me, they disregard it entirely. They claim it's simply a harmless crush, as if it were some innocent schoolboy behavior. Sometimes they make subtle comments that appear to encourage it. For example, when my wife met my parents for the first time, the event was meant to be warm and inviting, the standard meet the family stuff. But while we were all sitting around chatting, my mother said to my wife, who was then just a girlfriend, something like, "You are so funny. You'd actually be a much better match for my other son, Ethan. You two have the same kind of humor." She even laughed a little as she said this, as if she thought it was a funny, harmless comment. Then my father weighed in, agreeing with her. He said to my wife something like, "Yeah, Ethan is a hoot. You'll probably have more fun with someone like him." I remember sitting there, wondering if I had heard correctly. Why were they attempting to link my brother and my partner? Who would say such a thing to their partner? Because my wife and I were both taken aback by their statements at first, we assumed they were kidding and attempted to laugh it off. However, my parents have often suggested that my wife would have been a better match for my brother. It's as if they've never stopped thinking about this. They've often remarked things like, "She's so much more like Ethan," or commented on how my wife and Ethan have such similar personalities. As if this means she has the wrong son. Even on our wedding day, just before the ceremony, my mother grabbed my wife aside and asked her, "Are you sure you want to marry him?" It was as if she was giving my partner one last chance to back out, hoping my wife would change her mind and go. Can you imagine how devastating that was to hear on our wedding day? I had a large argument with my parents about this and almost shut them out of my life at the time. They then offered a half-hearted apology, pledging never to speak that way to my wife again. Every year, on my brother's birthday, they make an extra effort to persuade my wife to stand next to him for photographs or movies. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable we feel. They'll say things like, "Come on, you two look so good in pictures together." Or, "Just one photo. Don't be so stiff." It's subtle but consistent. No matter how many times we attempt to dismiss it or gently move the situation, it persists. When we've brought this up and attempted to have an honest talk about how uncomfortable all of this is for us, my folks have just shrugged it off as if it were nothing. My mother usually tries to rationalize it by claiming that my brother has never had a decent girlfriend and is simply smitten with my wife since she is so attractive and he enjoys standing next to her. My father is not doing any better. He says things like, "What's the harm in standing next to him for a photo if it makes your brother happy?" He truly feels it's not a huge problem, that it's just a minor detail, but it isn't. We eventually had enough. We have stopped attending family occasions with my brother because we have been made to feel uncomfortable and disregarded far too often. No birthdays, no gatherings, nothing. We have entirely pulled back. I have also ceased visiting my parents, as has my wife. However, my mother insists that we go this time because she has invited all of my cousins and distant relatives, and she does not want me to miss it in case people start asking questions. Lily, if I still don't come. Update 1. Thank you everybody for your remarks. The fact is, I have yet to determine whether or not to attend the impending family function. I've been going back and forth in my mind about it, and part of me wants to go just to meet other family members, but the other part of me keeps thinking about everything that has happened over the years, how they have treated my wife, how they have always made excuses for my brother, and how they continue to ignore our boundaries as if they don't exist. Do I go pretend everything is well simply to maintain the peace? Or do I remain? A way to safeguard the tiny corner we've managed to carve out for ourselves? So yes, I'm still on the fence. Update 2. Okay, so we chose to go for my parents' wedding anniversary, which was a huge mistake. Throughout the ceremony, my folks were overjoyed to see me. My mother grabbed me passionately and told me she didn't expect me to come and how glad she was that I came. I simply nodded and smiled. Everything was going well until supper. We were all sitting around the table catching up and making light chat. Then one of my aunts casually said that all of my cousins were married, or in relationships, with the exception of my brother Ethan. She smiled a bit and asked him, half jokingly, why he was still unmarried and whether he was dating anybody he may marry soon. My brother only grinned uncomfortably and reddened, as if he was trying to hide something. Then one of the cousins playfully shouted, "Come on, Ethan. Spill it. Do you have a crush or what?" That's when my mother, without missing a beat, said loudly, "Oh, I don't know about a girlfriend, but he does have a huge crush on his brother's wife." She then pointed her finger at my wife and laughed as if it was the funniest thing ever. My father joined in, laughing even louder. My wife and I both froze. I looked up from my plate, my jaw tense, and locked eyes with my mother. But she didn't notice. She was too busy laughing and chatting to my aunt, saying something about how my brother had been entranced with my wife for so many years, as if it were some kind of romantic movie storyline and not a completely improper fixation to be obsessed with your own brother's spouse. As if that wasn't enough, my aunt went to my wife and said loudly and without hesitation, "Do you have any sisters or female cousins Ethan could possibly date?" Some of the family chuckled as they heard this. My brother merely sat there blushing, smiled slightly, as if everything was perfectly normal. He didn't try to shut down my parents. He didn't try to redirect the topic elsewhere. He merely sat there taking in the attention as though it was flattering. I could feel the heat rising on my face. I turned to face my wife, who sat there looking embarrassed and mortified. This was the final straw. I did not even think. I just snapped. I spoke loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear. And I turned to my mother and asked, "How dare you talk about my wife like this?" The entire table became silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I looked at my parents and said, "You promised me, both of you, that you wouldn't cross this line again. You swore that you'd respect our boundaries and stop putting us in uncomfortable situations, but here we are again. You're laughing about my brother having a crush on my wife. You think this is funny?" My voice shook, but I didn't care. Then I turned to the rest of the table, my cousins, aunts and uncles, and said, "Let me ask you all something. How many of you think it's okay for someone to openly say they have a crush on their own sibling's partner, and for the whole family to laugh about it like it's some kind of sitcom scene? Do you think this is normal?" No one said anything. My aunt's grin was taken away. Others drank their beverages hesitantly. Suddenly, no one had an answer. I then went to my brother, and just let it out. "You've been acting like a creep around my wife for years," I screamed, my voice quivering with rage. "You flirt with her every time we're around. You've sent her late-night texts even though she's never replied. You try to stand too close to her, touch her when she's clearly uncomfortable, and act like it's all a joke." My brother's face sank immediately. I looked around the table and continued, "And you all think this is funny? You really think it's okay for someone to act this way toward their brother's wife?" I turned to my parents and said, "And you too? How many times have you made comments about how my wife and Ethan would be such a good match? You've been doing this for years. You even said stuff like this at our wedding. Do you even realize how messed up that is? How incredibly disrespectful it is?" Not just to I was also upset with my aunt for falling for my mother's prank. So I looked directly at her and asked, "Would you ever say this kind of stuff about your own son's partner? Would you tell your daughter-in-law that she'd be a better fit for someone else in the family? Would you let your son act like that around someone else's wife?" She looked stunned and shook her head slowly. "Exactly," I said. "So, why are you comfortable with my parents doing this to me?" You could feel the room contracting into itself. Everyone felt uncomfortable now, not because of me, but because I stated what needed to be spoken, something everyone most likely already knew, but chose to ignore. My parents sat there, absolutely startled. My father looked like he was going to burst, his cheeks flushed and his hands gripped on the table. In contrast, my mother began to panic. She tried to laugh it off, her voice shaky, saying, "I didn't mean anything by it. Come on, it's not that serious. It's just a harmless crush. We've always just joked like that about your wife and Ethan. I'm sorry, but it is just funny, and I wasn't really trying to offend anyone." That's when my wife, who had been sitting next to me all evening, silent and humiliated, finally snapped at my mother. She moved her chair back slightly and looked straight at my mother. Her voice was calm yet loud and cutting, audible to everyone. "Oh, I get it now," she said. "Since everything's just a joke to you, I guess cheating on your husband all those years ago was just for fun too, right?" My mother's eyes were wide. "I mean," my wife added, her tone becoming harsher, "I guess you had a harmless crush on the neighbor too, right? And I guess when you decided to sleep with him, it didn't mean anything. It was just for fun, wasn't it?" The whole space was quiet. My father looked as if he had been hit in the stomach, and my mother looked absolutely devastated. My mother became white in the face. I couldn't hold back a pleased laugh. What my wife had stated was totally correct. My parents had hidden this unpleasant little secret from everyone for years. Long ago, my mother cheated on my father with their neighbor, and when he discovered out, she begged him not to leave. He stayed only for me and my brother. He appeared to have forgiven her, or at least moved on. But my wife knows the truth since I told her. She'd had it for many years. Finally, she had turned the facts around and used it to get back at my mother for always hurting her. She had endured years of pain, inappropriate comments, strange jokes, and watching my parents treat her as if she were a prize for my brother rather than my partner, before finally resorting to the one thing she knew would put an end to everything. My mother came out of her disbelief and quickly began ranting at my wife. She yelled that my wife had no right to bring up that previous affair in front of her, and that she had gone too far. My father also jumped in, increasing his voice and saying that bringing up the past was rude and pointless. But I was having none of that. I stood up and shouted back. "You crossed the line the moment you made my wife the punchline to your creepy jokes. The moment you kept defending Ethan like he was some kind of harmless little boy when he's been making my wife uncomfortable for years. Don't you dare talk about disrespect when you've disrespected our marriage over and over again." My mother began to cry in front of everyone, trying to spin it around as if she was the victim now. However, people were still digesting the idea that my mother had cheated on my father when everyone believed they were the perfect pair. Ethan eventually opened his mouth, only to yell at me for spoiling the celebration. "You always have to make everything about you," he said with anger. I just gazed at him, surprised that this was what he took away from it all. "You think I'm the one making this about me?" I said, my voice calm but forceful. "You sat there and let Mom announce your crush on my wife like it was some joke. You didn't say a word to stop it. You blushed, like it wasn't disgusting. You let them humiliate me and my wife again in front of everyone. And now you're mad at me for standing up?" He scowled at me and raised his arms wistfully. "Oh please. You always act like the victim. No one even said anything that bad." My wife and I decided to leave while my parents and Ethan continued to yell and blame each other. The ranting did not appear to be stopping anytime soon. And honestly, what was the purpose in remaining any longer? They were clearly uninterested in listening to or comprehending our point of view. They simply wanted to be furious and play the victim. So, without another word, we silently collected up our belongings and went away. "We're done," I said before departing. "Don't dare to contact us unless you all grow up and are willing to accept some responsibility." Since that night, my phone has been continually buzzing. The majority of them came from my mother, but a couple also came from my father. They're angry and guilt-tripping. They kept telling me that my wife and I had no right to reveal Mom's adultery, especially in front of the entire family. According to them, we utterly ruined their so-called picture-perfect marriage by revealing my mother's affair to everyone. My mother in particular has been unrelenting. She claims she has been humiliated, that everyone now looks at her differently, and that we have ruined her reputation. Because of all of this, my mother now expects my wife to publicly apologize to her for what she said at dinner. My mother feels that my wife owes her an apology for exposing her hypocrisy and bringing up an issue that, in her opinion, should have been left alone. It's really exhausting. Update 3. After days of debating in my own brain, I eventually picked up the phone and phoned my folks. I knew the talk was going to be difficult, but I also knew I had to say what needed to be said simply and frankly. I informed them quietly but firmly that after all they had said and done, not just at that terrible meal, but over the years, I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay between us. I said that my wife and I were weary of being insulted. I stated that I had spent years trying to preserve the peace, sending money every month to assist them out, not only because they had requested, but because I honestly wanted to. I believed that was the correct thing to do. I wanted to assist them since they were my parents, and Ethan was plainly not contributing. But today, given how they have continued to treat us after all of the humiliation, apparent favoritism, and utter lack of responsibility, I informed them I could no longer continue. I informed them that I would be breaking off all communication. No more phone calls, no more visits, no more cash assistance. I stated that this was the only option for me and my wife to mend and live in harmony. My parents did not take it well. When I told them I was cutting them off financially, they totally lost it. My mother began shouting at me, calling me ungrateful and accusing me of leaving my family. My father intervened, claiming I was turning my back on the people who had reared me for years. They kept telling me I was overreacting to what they claimed was simply a joke. They never accepted responsibility or apologized for their faults. My mother even accused my wife of turning me against them, as if I had the mental capacity to make my own judgments. They practically cursed me, saying I'd regret it for the rest of my life when my wife ultimately left me. It was hard to hear, but I didn't give up. I held my ground and stopped the call. Since then, my wife and I have blocked them. Update 4. It's been over 3 months since my previous update, and a lot has transpired since then. First and foremost, after cutting off my brother and warning him several times, Ethan has persisted to write my wife weird, unsolicited love notes, even when we threatened to involve the police. He didn't appear to care. Then, a month ago, my wife and I got some amazing news. We are pregnant and expecting a child. We were pleased and spread the good news on social media. This was plainly a tremendous error, since events earlier this week took a scary turn. When my wife returned home from work, she was surprised to discover Ethan sitting on our doorstep waiting for her. He began to get up as soon as she noticed him. She instantly felt uneasy. So she returned to her car and began driving away, while he raced towards it and begged her to remain and talk to him. I can't begin to imagine how terrified she must have felt at that time. She called and I hurried home as quickly as I could. We both phoned the police straight away, but because Ethan hadn't officially committed any laws yet, such as beating my wife or entering into our home, they couldn't arrest him. According to the police, he has not committed a crime, only repeated harassment. So they let him go with a warning, which upsets me to no end. He's breaking so many rules, yet the law can't seem to do much until it's too late. However, we did consult with a lawyer, and he is assisting us in filing a restraining order against my brother. My wife no longer feels safe in our current house. I also don't want to endanger her or our unborn kid in case Ethan shows up again. So we've decided to sell our property and relocate to a different place away from all of the chaos before our kid arrives. I'm beyond frustrated and drained. This situation is out of control, and I am doing everything I can to protect my wife and child. I cannot allow anything happen to them.